suppression.
Vincent Chin murder just galvanized and motivated a lot of people to speak out even more than they were doing. Helen was an activist before that, but I think she became more involved in the Asian American community after that, with the contacts that she made across the country. And I think Stuart Quill, who was always involved in Asian American issues since the start of the Asian American movement, came forward and stepped up and was able to help provide leadership.
We need our own stories of people. We don't have a lot of Jesse Jacksons in our community, but we do have a number of Lily Chins. When Mrs. Chin came to Los Angeles, he was talking at a very crowded Chinatown restaurant, and at one point she collapsed, and I helped her to her feet, and that night she was staying at our home, and I asked her, Lily, are you okay? And she said, Stuart, there's nothing I can do to bring back Vincent, but I don't want any other mother to go through what I've gone through.
I will never forget. That's when I saw Vincent Chen's mother is standing in front of protesters and the news media from all over. She made a statement and I knew how she felt. She stood in front of many people and I quote, I am here for justice for my son, unquote. As a mother, I knew exactly how she felt.
Unfortunately, while we were filming, every time she saw the camera, it reminded her of the tragedy, and she started, she got very emotional. But off camera, she was the funniest, she loves to cook, she was always trying to set us up, like she always tried to set me up with Jim Shimura, who was saying about sunset, blinded, but he wasn't interested. This kind of tragedy, that was her only son, and she's such a homebody. I mean, she just, you can imagine her. He was going to move in with her and meet Vicky after they got married. She was looking forward to grandchildren. That's how you can imagine Louis Chin. And she ended up, after the Cincinnati trial, I guess she left Detroit. She lived in a boarding room in San Francisco for a while. She lived with relatives in Iowa. It was really, really devastating to her, but she still just came to everything. It's amazing, but it's amazing because you don't have to be this sort of iconic hero that people think about to really create change.
In many ways, we're kind of running on-the-job training. We had to kind of pursue this thing without a roadmap. The community didn't have any kind of justice organization. We didn't have a group like NAACP out there to fight for us. So we had to kind of start from scratch.
When you're looking at the development of new organizations, looking at groups like American Citizens for Justice in the Michigan area, national groups, you saw the evolution and growth of those groups. So that they became important players both locally and nationally.
When we first worked on the case, at that time the legal center had one person, that was me. Today we have a network around the country.
The Vincent Chin case is important not just to Detroiters. It's important not just to people who lived through the 1980s. It's important not just to Asian Americans. This story is the story of America.
Before the Vincent Chin case, the hate crime arena was just limited to a black-white paradigm. But because of that case, things have really opened up in terms of the multifaceted nature of the movement, and it has been broadened to people of different ethnicities, gender preference, and sexual orientation.
The Vincent Chin case really is a milestone, not just for Asian Americans, but really in all of American history and in civil rights history in particular, because this was really the first time, not that an Asian American was ever taken up by federal civil rights law. It was a challenge, and not just that he was Asian American, but also that he was an immigrant. And the question of Vincent Chin's citizenship was one of the first things that the federal prosecutors looked at when they were trying to decide whether this was a case that the federal government should be bothered with, that was within the purview and federal protection, that an immigrant would be protected, that somebody of Asian ancestry would be protected. And this was debated. This was not a slam dunk foregone conclusion. This opened up the whole civil rights definition, the arena, the way we look at civil rights, and really the way we look at the humanity and human rights of all people. Americans, but all people in America. We can, as Asian Americans, be very proud that this piece of Asian American history is a critical piece of American history that every American should be proud of and every American should know about.
I first heard about Vincent Chin in 2002. I had recently graduated from college and I attended the LA Tofu Festival that summer with a couple of friends. And we had walked by the t-shirt booth and I found this one t-shirt that said V. Chin and some years in which Vincent Chin had lived. And I wasn't familiar with the name, so I asked the lady who was working at the booth what that meant. And she told me the very sad story of Vincent Chin and how he was murdered and the circumstances around that. And it really made me very sad. And so I went home that evening and I decided to do some research on my own. And I sat there for probably 3 hours reading about what had happened, and I was crying in front of the computer because I was so touched and hurt by what had happened.
Unfortunately, I heard about Vincent Chin at a much later point in time. I came to class one day and just sat down and watched this documentary that just changed me, blew my mind. That was the first kind of documentary or movie or anything that just galvanized so much feeling in me, so much emotion, so much anger. I remember definitely thinking after the movie was finished that I wanted to punch a wall. And I mean, seriously, like I just wanted to, like, bam, like punch a wall so hard.
Vincent Chin's murder remains a huge issue in our community. It evokes a lot of emotion. It is this sad reminder of how vulnerable we all are.
Well, if we look at historically how Asian Americans have been treated, they've been excluded from the United States altogether. That's the best way to address the Asian problem, is to not let them into the country at all, or if they happen to be in the country, to not let them become citizens. And that's been the institutional form of discrimination that's been the most long-standing against Asians.
Asian Americans have always been thought of as like the littlest minority, you know, not just in size in terms of stature, but you know, in terms of the amount of power we wield. We're thought of as foreigners. The paradigm for race relations has always been black and white, and we gotta find some way to elbow our way to the table so we get to be part of the national dialogue on race.
I absolutely think that if Asian Americans had more political power and a presence, there could have been a change in the verdict, and things might have been different.
You would have hoped that the life of that one man would have amounted to a little bit more than what we have today. Because today we're still definitely struggling to achieve equal class status with other groups in America.
Frankly, I'd like to see Asian Americans get off their asses. You know, enough trying to like fit in and appease everybody. You know, the Asian community gets very, very infuriated when, you know, Abercrombie and Fitch makes a funny t-shirt or something like that. Well, you know what, I think we should sort of own it and attack back. You know, enough demanding like apologies. Attack back.
In the African American society, there's been tremendous injustices that people can sort of get angry about. But in Asian American sort of culture and history here in the United States, you don't hear a lot about the stories. You don't hear a lot about the Vincent Chins.
High school students in their textbooks barely get a paragraph on internment. They're not getting anything on Vincent Chin, right? They're barely getting 3 sentences on the collateral damage post 9/11, right? They're not getting anything on Vincent Chin.
And I think that the big challenge we have is to figure out ways in which the history of Asian Americans, not just in tragic cases such as this, not just Joseph Aledo, not just Tulsa Lee, but how the history of Asians as part of this country gets much more woven into our fabric. And it's true with Latinos, African Americans, etc. There is still a process which we haven't really completed of making sure that the history taught in our schools is of all Americans.
Folks who weren't even born when Vincent Chin was killed in 1982. It may seem like something that, well, that's ancient history, but unfortunately, there are just too many examples around today, even today, that are happening to other young people who face the same kind of prejudice attacks and even getting murdered in similar ways that Vincent Chin was killed in those days. So there's nothing ancient history or old hat at all to what happened to Vincent Chin.
In 1999, there was a white supremacist in Chicago who gunned down an African American and a Korean American on the same day, the 4th of July. The Korean American community came out strongly like they've never done before to oppose both that and also to reach out to the African American community. And then again with Joseph Leto, many communities came together, including the Filipino American community. So I think that Vincent Chin taught our different specific communities how to respond.
The Vincent Chin case is an example of a situation where you can see Pan-Asian unity as a response, as an activist response to something that affected all Asian Americans in a single instance. But it's challenging because there's not every issue that's going to affect Asian Americans or a significant number of Asian Americans is necessarily going to be enough to galvanize everybody in a pan-Asian way.
During 1992 in the LA riots, as opposed to what is remembered and said about the Vincent Chin movement, the justice movement around his case, the LA incident was one where ethnic Koreans pretty much stood alone. There were people in Los Angeles that tried to build the coalition broader, but initially it was pretty clear that Koreans were by themselves. You know, the other Asian ethnicities did not want to be identified as ethnic Korean.
If the Hmong community had been more aware and involved with the Vincent Chin case and with the Asian Pacific American movement in this country, I think we would have had better tools to help us do our work in the Midwest around hate crimes, better strategies that helped us deal with the media. While we were moving forward, I think we had to build a lot of things from scratch.
What just came to your mind as you were thinking about Vincent Chin?
9/11 and its impact on South Asians.
Do you see any differences in the reasons for the attack?
No, not really. The guys thought he was Japanese when he was obviously Chinese and didn't think to differentiate, just like that. Like Muslim terrorists who are on the list. I mean, Sikhs get stopped because they have turbans and they're asked to remove their turbans, even though they're a completely different religion and completely different culture. And for them, removing a turban in public is like, you know, dropping your pants. So it's a huge insult.
One of the ugliest legacies of this crisis is homegrown. The surge of intolerance and hate crimes against Muslims and people who are mistaken for them.
How bad is it? Congressman John Kuski, Republican from Louisiana, apologized today for this remark.
If I see someone that comes in that's got a diaper on his head and a fan belt around his diaper on his head, that guy needs to be pulled over and checked.
When 9/11 happened and the Japanese American community was literally the first to come out and say, this cannot happen again. We do not want our South Asian American brothers and sisters and our Arab American brothers and sisters put in detention camps and strip searched and taken away from their homes and have their rights erased as Americans. That was probably one of the most beautiful moments of my young adult life.
September 11th, the day after Japanese Americans started rallying to the defense of Arab and Muslim Americans and South Asians, and requesting that they be protected from the type of discrimination that they had suffered during World War II. My parents were put in camps. My older brother, who was 1 year old at the time, was essentially considered a spy and a saboteur, which is ridiculous. It was one of the worst civil nightmares this country has ever faced.
To see another community come out with such vigor and forcefulness on behalf of another community because they have lived that experience, you can't ask for better allies or for better support. And you know, that's the direction our community needs to continue to move in, to say, I've lived this, you shouldn't have to live this.
Dr. King said a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I think it behooves us to try to support each other where our goals and our interests are the same. They might not always be, but there are a lot of areas where we have common interests. And even if we don't have common interests, I mean, it's important to create those interpersonal relationships and loyalties so that you can reach across ethnic lines and get support from people who may not ordinarily have supported you.
There is a growing identity that we should be united. I think that is a difficult and always a struggle to get there, but I think it's a struggle in a good way.
Starting to see more pan-Asian things, people among different groups getting together, doing things. But even neighborhoods changing, like I'm seeing Koreans come into different neighborhoods, Korean Americans, and vice versa, Chinese going here. And just little things like that make all the difference. And I'm seeing pop culture stuff. It's a Pan-Asian group doing stuff. And it's just starting out, so if you're Asian American, I kind of think if you're into community building Asian American, this is the time.
It took a few hundred years for the